Hey there, Bob from Oregon's Constant Gardener. Welcome to the OCG Fam Show to you, my YouTube buddies. What's going on? Let me know in the comments and we'll talk about it. And speaking of the comments, we had some great questions in the comments the other day from yesterday's video. And I believe Christopher is going to be working on those, but also we'll be looking at those for a Friday show with Scott. Answering those, have Scott actually answer them on the show. So should be pretty cool. Today, I think I got something you're going to like. It's pretty cool. Forrest has been doing some research on microbials, little creepy crawlies in the soil, and found some interesting stuff. And so I talked to him. It was, 15 minutes or so we talked. It was some very interesting stuff. We talked about outdoor and indoor. The indoor stuff is a little later in the video, so you maybe skip ahead or maybe just watch the whole thing. It'll be fun. Anyway, this is the video. It's going to play now, so watch this, and I'll talk to you after.
Forrest, what's going on? Not a whole lot. How are you doing, Bob?
I'm doing good. So you did some research on the microbials. You told me a little about it.
Yeah.
But what were you thinking? What led you to doing the research on the microbial thing?
Well, I always thought it would just be a good idea. You know, a lot of people use different types of microbial inoculants, and it's always a good idea to just kind of look into each individual one, kind of see the main reasoning why, people use microbials in the first place. So that's kind of what gained my interest in looking more in depth into each individual one, just kind of the whole role that the microbiome plays with organics and such.
Well, what did you find out from your research? What was the?
Well, there's a few different things. There's definitely the primary two that most people use as bacteria and fungus primarily.
Sure.
A lot of the bacterias are going to be like bacillus strains, like Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus thuringiensis, things along those lines.
Uh-huh.
And then there's also different funguses that people will use, like Streptomyces. Some people will use Bokashi, things along those lines. And so they kind of just both interplay with each other in the old soil web. They compete with each other, some eat each other, they decompose, making nutrients available.
So, are we talking about naturally finding these things, naturally producing these things, or through bottles and bags and that sort of thing, or both? Or where does that come in with getting what you're looking for?
Well, I think it kind of is a little bit of both, ultimately.
Uh-huh.
I would say that, a lot of soil scientists had taken the time to learn about all these individual microbes and, what they all kind of individually play in the role of the ecology.
Uh-huh.
And then I think people who decided to make products for agricultural reasons kind of wanted to, find those particular microbes that do a particular job, do a bunch of different trials and testing, especially with different genuses of the same one, because even though it's a Bacillus subtilis, it might be a particular genus of that Bacillus subtilis that they eventually put in that final product, in order to keep the roots clean, protect from fungus, ultimately just increasing the health of the soil.
So I guess then what you're saying is that we got a situation maybe where we're trying to get a general healthful encourage bacteria situation, encourage fungus situation, maybe more like a bokashi or maybe some other, like making your compost teas or composting in your garden.
Yeah.
And then you've also got where people have taken that and dug through there and found the little particular things that do the little particular thing they're looking to do.
Absolutely.
So indoor versus outdoor, probably a huge difference in whether you do it naturally yourself or find the things.
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
I think one thing that I personally would find is that a lot of these different microbial inoculants are perfect for indoor applications, just because a lot of the time people are looking for a particular result as well as keeping it sanitary, because there are big things about, anaerobic, non-beneficial bacteria being able to take over a circumstance, which will just kind of, determine the health to not be as beneficial. Whereas I feel like outdoor, it has all those indigenous microorganisms that are usually around in that area.
Uh-huh.
They're used to being able to compete with each other and they keep each other in a balance. So, doing compost teas and things like that outdoor is great because you're getting a wider variety of competition, which can be beneficial, but especially with compost teas, you're making it aerobically. So you're making sure that it's aerobic-based bacteria, which tend to be the beneficial ones. And then you inoculate that, so in the hope that they'll outcompete the anaerobics and still be able to keep the soil beneficial. Whereas indoor, you're getting those beneficial aerobic bacteria, those ones you're wanting, like a phosphorus fixer or a nitrogen fixer, or one that's just overall going to protect the root zone, and that's why I kind of think that there's those two kinds of labels of thought where it's, we want particular actions indoor that we can see these results from, but then outdoor it's more so like if you're in the ground, regardless of whether you add compost teas, you're still going to have those naturally available microbials that could be out there, could be beneficial or not. It's just kind of trying to balance that system so that you don't have any particular issues, like you're getting a lockout of a certain type of nutrient, or it's not fully breaking down organics like compost that you had added into the soil, making sure that it's being appropriately broken down, is appropriately bioavailable, because sometimes, if it's imbalanced, you're not getting that direct nutrient exchange that you're looking for.
So in an outdoor situation, we've got checks and balances that bend towards good.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, whereas indoors we have a more brittle type environment where things can go wrong and spiral out of control.
Exactly, because it doesn't have all those natural checks and balances in the sense of, if we're going with like a sterile soil substrate that we had gotten that has no microbial inoculants, and then we're adding those particular microbials, we're kind of guaranteeing to an extent that we're getting those beneficials. Whereas in a certain sense, sometimes if you use compost tea on an indoor, or you're not properly cleaning your equipment, there might potentially be a pathogen that could arise within that, and then you're having to fight the system of, where did this pathogen come from? Another big topic that I always like to mention, and me and Colin both have talked about it, is that almost all water sources potentially have Fusarium and Pythium in them. And so even through some of these, like the different types of filters that we'll use, Fusarium and things might still pass through. So every kind of check and balance that we might be doing, even if you're in like a hydro system or something like that, and you're sticking away from microbials, there's still that potentiality that you might be getting like a root-borne fungus pathogen that you weren't aware of. And then being in an indoor situation where everything's sterile, it's going to take over, and it's going to become more of an issue, whether in the sense of it being outdoor, that Pythium that might be in the water source has to compete with everything else that's already present in the soil in order for it to dominate and to have ill effect. So
outside, there's stuff growing everywhere, and that's what bends towards the positive, right? Is that stuff wants to grow.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's just talk about outdoor for a minute then.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's specific things we may want to do, but what, in a garden outdoor kind of situation, what are some general things we can do to promote more happy bacterial and fungal type things going on? What would you say is the biggest stick you can use on this?
The biggest thing that I think you could use is, one, brewing your own compost tea, so you're getting more aerobic bacteria, but you're still getting a whole gathering of all these different microbials together. You're just leaning their environment towards more positive. So in the sense of creating these compost teas, whereas say general composting is usually anaerobic, and sometimes you need anaerobic bacteria to break down things like bone, or things that tend to be a lot more difficult to break down to its base mineral. But then you take that compost, once it's been composted, you put it in a compost tea that's being aerated, so you're creating an aerobic environment, so the aerobic bacteria outcompete the anaerobic bacteria, and then you water that into the soil in the hopes that the soil around the plant is going to have more beneficial bacteria than negative. So that's really what the whole point of brewing compost tea is you're trying to get the environment to want to reciprocate more of the beneficial bacteria, the aerobic bacteria.
Okay, so like I've read the Jeff Lowenfeld's books, and it's like a science of making this compost with the temperatures and all that.
Absolutely.
What you're saying is that is absolutely the case, but if you didn't quite get it quite right there, the reason you're going through the tea is because you're getting the benefits out of there, but you're hopefully negating some of the things that you might when you didn't do your compost just perfectly.
Exactly, because you're wanting to pretty much create an environment in which that microbial can out-dominate other ones, because that can be the case of pH, that could be the case of what kind of nutrients are available. All of those factors will really determine whether the environment of a particular bacteria is able to thrive and outcompete the other bacteria around it. So basically, you're just trying to really control that soil ecology from the pH, from what bacteria you're inputting, and what's already present in the soil too. So all of those things kind of factor into each other of creating a healthy soil biome.
So if you were going to make your compost tea, obviously you could do it from some humus and worm castings and make from everything you could buy in a bag or a bottle in the store. But if you were, throwing your coffee grounds and your dirt and doing that out in your yard, and you had that stuff, and you felt pretty good about that, and you were going to use that as a base for your compost tea, what else would you be putting in your compost tea if you were actually using compost?
If I was actually using compost, at that point, that's really the thing, is you're wanting to use the compost as like the inoculant itself, because there's already bacteria that's present on your compost when it's being decomposed.
Okay.
So that's the whole point, is like in comparatively to like a microbial tea product like Cultured Biologics, for example, they have those particular bacterials that are already present in there, and as soon as they get put into the water, they're activating, so you're guaranteeing that.
Okay.
Whereas with compost, for example, you're getting all the indigenous microorganisms that are already present outside that would naturally decompose all that plant matter, and then you're kind of making the environment beneficial for the ones you want in that compost. And so I think that that's kind of the benefit, is that some people will even use something like bokashi, for example, can be used in your compost as well as in your compost tea. I know a lot of people will use it because bokashi in particular is an anti-odorizer. So it'll help get rid of the anaerobic bacteria that creates a lot of that putrid smell. But you can also use that in a compost tea to ensure that that bokashi is available when you also water it into your plants.
So let's just really get the basics. I got a big pile of compost. Would you throw some bokashi on top of there? Would you roll it inside of it? What would you do with it?
You know, I think layering it's always a great idea, because when you're making compost, you always want to layer it between like leaf greens and carbons. So you want to do like a bunch of your dead leaf, and then maybe do some sticks and branches, and then maybe your lawn clippings, and then maybe some more sticks and branches. And between each of those layers, you can throw bokashi in there to guarantee that that layer is being properly decomposed. There's oxygen that's getting in there. It's allowing those microbials to really break free and break down all of those carbon chains that are in the life forms. So ultimately, I think that, adding bokashi on top of layering all of your compost is a really big thing. And one thing that I've been interested in learning is being able to do, like, I want a veg compost. I want a flowering compost, which you could do like veg. It's going to be all your leafy greens, like your lettuce, your grass clippings, your leaf remains. Whereas with like a flowering one, which in my opinion would be a higher phosphate, it would be like your leftover squashes or your tomatoes, anything that produced a fruit on it. A lot of carbons from your branches and from other really woody materials. And so at that point, you can kind of cater to what nutrients are available in what compost. So you can kind of adjust over the year, saying, oh, this is my heavy nitrogen compost, this is what I want for early veg, this is going to be my heavier phosphate and potassium compost, this is what I'm going to use towards the end of the year. And I think that that's when it really starts to get interesting, of what microbials am I inputting, as well as what plant sources am I adding to have what nutrients be available throughout the year.
Wow. So it gets to be harvest time and all that. You're taking all your stuff, you're throwing it into some various different piles based on what it is. And then are you going to be ready by the time it's time to plant again? Or are you going to be going another... Does time heal all wounds with this kind of thing? I mean, is it better to longer?
I honestly think yes, because compost, it will tell you when it's done, ultimately. When it's all done and decomposed, it should have that really good humus forest smell. It shouldn't have that kind of putrid, degrading kind of smell, because that's when you know there's still anaerobics in there, they're still doing their job of breaking it down, but you should get that really nice, fluffy, like brownish, really good smelling material. That's when you know it's done, and that could take upwards of a year or two, just depending on the different qualities of your inputs, how microbially active your compost pile is, as well as if you go through heat methods. There's all kinds of stuff you could read up on how to compost and how to go
using one of those roly-poly things and stuff, or
I would like to personally, just because that'll add extra oxygen in there instead of having to flip it. So that's what I would personally like to use right now. I just have one of the regular type composters. You just throw them in there and toss it around every now and then. But it can definitely go to that level for those who are interested in really learning about what kind of styles of compost and inputs and microbials that you want.
So I've made my compost, and I'm going to make a tea out of it. I made compost in my yard. Am I just throwing that in some bubbly water? Or am I putting some molasses in there? How am I doing? What's the process?
Yes, primarily, that's the most simple thing that you could honestly do, is if you just wanted to take compost and molasses, which is just your sugar source, that's going to be the food source for the microbials. You can do that as the most simple compost tea that you want. It's just your compost you made in your yard, put it in a nylon bag, one of the compost tea bags, aerate it, throw some molasses in there, and you're still having a great compost tea. Bioavailable nutrients, you're getting all your microbials in there, but then from there you can build it to anything that you want. Some people will add, rock phosphate, guanos, diatomaceous earth, things along those lines. So really it's kind of like a cake that you want to make any kind of design for, and you can build it from there. But really, that's the most simple compost, is compost you made in the yard, cup of molasses, aerate it for 24 hours.
Nice. And then you maybe you go from there to see what works for you as far as adding things in.
100%.
Now, what about adding things in like maybe some full-on or some Microbial Photo Plus or those things at the end? Do you think there's a big benefit from that? I mean, or would you just do those separately from that? Or
I would say that if you're going to be doing it as like your tea day, for example, I would say it's beneficial, but a lot of companies had mentioned that, yes, you want to do it towards the end of the brew.
Sure, right.
Because there might be some microbials in these products that are non-dominant, that are not able to actually outcompete the other microbials that are present in the compost tea. So you don't want to let it go through the full brew because it might be outcompeted and you might not have that microbe towards the end. So yeah, if you're doing it as your tea day and you've always used Photo Plus and you're like, man, I really love what Photo Plus does, but I want to add it in my compost tea, like, maybe an hour before you're about to water, throw it in there, a little bit of full on, throw that in there, just so that it hasn't gone through full digestion and the ability that it might have been outcompeted by other stuff that's in the compost.
So I'm getting it fully combined in there and given a little time to percolate a little bit, but not making it part of the thing. And you think that there is some benefit to those things.
Absolutely.
But largely the case with this sort of situation, it's the compost and the molasses that are making the thing happen to get with this particular.
Absolutely.
Okay. So now let's say let's go shift gears a little bit and go to an indoor situation. Are you still maybe going to use a compost tea like that? If you took your compost, you made your compost, and you made a tea out of it, you feel pretty good about it. Still feel kind of sketchy about using that indoors?
I would say, it's still a beneficial thing to use indoors, but my personal opinion is if you've already gone out of your way to be able to get these microbial inoculants, all of these products that you're guaranteeing a result from, I think in an indoor application where potentially overheads might be a little bit higher, it might be a better solution to just go with the products that because you're getting a result from it. You might not potentially have to deal with issues later down the line, that there might have been that one tea that might not have gotten cleaned out appropriately the previous time you brewed it, and then it might have brewed something negative, and then you're like, what's going on? And so
no way to figure out what's going on.
Exactly. Other than if you have a microscope and someone who knows these microbials that way. But ultimately, I've known plenty of people. I've done it indoors myself and had great results with it too. I think it's just about your due diligence of being cleanly indoors. I think that's the bigger thing, is that outdoors you have a little bit more leniency in not having to be as sanitary. And so if you're in an indoor application where you're wanting to get, obviously the best crop you can, I think it's best to go with the products that have results, that we know that will give you those results. So that's at least my personal opinion, but by all means, I've done both. I've added compost tea indoors, I've used my microbial inoculants outdoors. It's really just your personal preference and what your system is.
But you're working without a net inside, and so you better be careful with what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. And it's about your end result ultimately. I've done certain indoor grows where I would do compost teas once a week, every week, and had great returns and never had a single issue throughout it. So that's the only reason, is I would just fair warn, is just to keep that in mind, that if you are someone who likes to do compost teas indoors, to just keep an eye out with that idea. I think another big thing is that if your compost tea brewer starts to smell putrid, like it smells like manure, give it a good clean. Make sure you sanitize it, use some Sanidate or some Zerotol, something that's really going to do the job. Just
a serious cleaning,
just to make sure that you're starting with a new slate, new compost, and re-aerate. And so, compost tea should always smell good. You should always come up and smell it, and it should smell like, oh my gosh, this smells really nice and smells pleasant. So that's another big factor too.
Okay. So I want to ask you another thing. Let's just take like a thing like Megaphos, a phosphorus uptake enhancer. It is specifically for a task, a certain thing. If we're looking at, all these things will tell you kind of what their specific tasks are, but if I'm just in my grow here, I haven't done anything other than use my nectar or whatever I'm doing, and I'm feeling like I want to get the biggest bang for my buck as far as having some microbial to my thing. What would that be? What do you? I'm starting from scratch. What's the biggest hammer I can use as far as having richer soil life?
Ultimately, I would say that indoors, Megaphos is a really great product. Like I was mentioning before, I feel like the people at Blacksmith Bioscience did their due diligence on researching each individual one, because it's a Bacillus magitarium is the product in Megaphos in particular, but they tried over 20 different strains of Bacillus magitarium and were looking at the highest rating percentage of one that had solubilized phosphorus. And that was the particular genus of Bacillus magitarium that they went with in their product, because they got the highest result of phosphorus fixing. So that's why I feel like Megaphos is a great product. If you're trying to unlock phosphorus, you're a heavy nectar user, you use a lot of bone meal, a lot of calcium products, Megaphos is going to be great because anything that might not have been 100% pre-digested, anything that might not necessarily be bioavailable, it's going to go in there and ensure that those phosphoruses are available to the plant. And so I think that's why it's so great to have these bagged products, is because they're taking all the time to research and develop these particular microbials that give you the best results that you're looking for plant health. And so ultimately I think that that's why, you know, these certain types of products are, you know, really beneficial in the sense of using them in an indoor application.
Okay, so let's say I'm using number 4 nectar soil. I've got some mycorrhiza in there, some stuff, some bacteria stuff, or some microbial life going on in my soil to start with probably. I'm using some Megaphos. I've got some microbial stuff there that I've decided Megaphos works for me. I want to get that phosphorus uptake. Would I still be doing maybe a cultured tea or maybe a microbe life, or do you think that I'm okay?
Me personally, yes. I would still say that I would do a cultured biologics tea or other mycorrhiza additives, because in my personal opinion is that, you know, having competition in the soil is beneficial. Competition is ultimately going to equate to bioavailable nutrients. So even if there are other microbials that might killing other microbials off, what's happening is that when a microbe is digesting a carbon source like a compost or something, it's taking that into its body, but it doesn't become plant available until that one actually dies and decomposes. So it gets eaten by another microbial or dies from natural sources. Once that microbe dies, there is now plant available nutrients in the soil. So having that little bit of competition is ultimately going to increase the health of the soil biome. You know, having that competition, that's what happens in nature. And so yes, I still think that it's a good idea, and that's why we re-inoculate, you know, multiple times potentially in a round of flower, is because you're ensuring that even if there is competition, like say Bacillus subtilis is out competing the Bacillus maggitarium and it's competing it, I want to re-inoculate that maggitarium again to get their populations up, and then they might fight back again, but in the end that whole response is creating bioavailable nutrients. It's getting your plant health up. And so that's my personal opinion. Yeah, it's a great thing to re-inoculate and to use a few different kinds and just kind of see what, you know, obviously strain dependent and what microbials seem to do the best for you. I think that's the big thing about kind of experimenting with this stuff.
So I guess it sounds like what you're saying is that in addition to your nutrients, you would use a general microbial inoculant before you went to stretching out to using a specialized one like a phosphorus uptake or something like that. You would still have a general type thing in there.
Absolutely, and I think there's different times for it as well. You know, it's like what kind of results are you wanting to get? I think a general purpose like Photo O or a cultured tea product, for example, is always great because it's giving you that whole balance of them. You know, it's ensuring that you're getting a bunch of different varieties in there, but then as well to kind of shift over towards like, oh, it's now mid-flower, I'm wanting to get as much phosphorus uptake as I can. I might hit a little bit heavier with my phosphorus fixing products, but I'll still throw, you know, maybe another feeding on my tea day of some Photo or some culture, just to ensure that there's still as much variety as possible in the soil.
Okay, if you're doing that phosphorus thing, just as a side question, obviously you're wanting that in flower, right? So how early before flower would you get into it, or would you get into it just as flower starts?
I think it's always a good idea to do it maybe as that preemptive week of veg right before you're about to flip to flower. Maybe you either have right before you transplant, or if you do a transplant and your final pot size, but you still want to let it veg for maybe a week just to get those roots in there. It's always a good idea to still add those phosphorus fixing products to build it up in the soil by the time that it's really needing it, you know, at week 4 or 5, that there's already that process happening, you know, because if you start it later, then the process might take a little bit of time and it's already past the point in which you want that phosphorus.
We're not doing this, that's not going to the plant, we're feeding the soil.
Yes.
And so that's why we want to be a little bit ahead of the game, but not a lot ahead of the game.
Right. It's another variance. It's like, you know, these products that you're purchasing, it's like, where's those ideal points? But yes, you want to make sure that they're present in the soil slightly ahead of the time so that they have the time to culture and to build their populations up in the soil, so you're getting that response by the time the plant's like, hey, I'm hungry for phosphorus, you know? It's like you've already been doing 2 tablespoons of bone meal and you're starting to add Megaphos, but within a week you're going to be up to 4-6 tablespoons of bone meal. We need to have something there that's ready to digest it as you're feeding it heavy. So that's at least my personal perspective.
So we're using our brain to figure out, because we know we're going to flip to flower, and so we know, and then we're also going to be looking at our response from the plant. But using our knowing what's going to happen down the line of getting a little bit ahead of that, a week or so ahead of that with most of these things, but not 3 weeks ahead.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. And I think that's, yet again, it's a part of the experimentation of, what plants you're growing, what kind of results you want from them, and just kind of, finding that sweet spot where you can add those microbials to get that benefit that you are, but not having to overuse, for example.
Do you see most of, when you're looking at this and you're trying to, over different runs, figure out how you should do things differently, do you see most of that in your final product and how that goes in experiment, or do you see response in the plant as you're going along?
I would say there's definitely a response to the plant, as well as obviously getting your final yields. And I think the numbers are really what would tell you the best, is that, if you're sticking with one particular strain and you grow it with just nectar, no other microbial inoculants, and then you get your yield at the end, in comparison to adding this one microbial product that you had done all the way through and what kind of variants you did. And then maybe by your last round, I'm doing a hodgepodge of all these different ones, and then whether or not you get a positive result or a negative result. And then from there, you just file it down and say, okay, this is when it's appropriate for me. This is when I've gotten the best return, and this is what works best for me as a grower.
So seeing your results at the end, but also just kind of a feeling as you're going with what you're doing. Over time, experience, run after run after run, you get more in touch with what's going on there.
Absolutely. And I think that's really a big thing too, is just, you do see those responses from your plant. Maybe they were stagnating for like a week or so, and you're like, man, they're not really growing as much as they really should have been. And then you give them 2 feedings of some tea or something, then all of a sudden they jump in growth, and it's like, oh man, maybe that's really what they needed, was that extra inoculant that they got added in there to really just make sure nutrients are available, the growth keeps going. And so that can definitely be a factor.
Color in the leaves, these sorts of things?
Yeah, because I think color of the leaves is going to be a big thing of how nutrient is being uptaken. I know a lot of the times when people will get lockout, or they'll start seeing a deficiency of some kind, big thing with nectar is doing your slurry tests, checking your pH, because not only the nutrient uptake is at a certain pH, but at which those microbials are actually able to digest those products are also at a certain pH.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Well, I think that pretty well covers it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you talking with us. It was very interesting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, that was fun. I hope you enjoyed that and found it informative and entertaining. That's the show for today. I don't know what we're doing tomorrow, but we're doing something tomorrow. I love you, and I'll see you then. For more information about anything on today's show, go to our website, OCGFAM.com. And if you buy anything while you're there, use the code GROWFAM20. It's going to save you 20%, and it's a lot of fun. The OCG Fam Show, it's pretty good. It happens every day. It's the OCG Fam Show. See you tomorrow.